Okay, Biali no chime. Today we're gonna learn more about verbs. We're gonna learn transitive verbs. So let me share my screen so that you all can see the presentation. And um, today's class is gonna be very grammar heavy. So you really do need to pay attention. This class has um, is one of the more important classes because you're going to learn how to indicate um, who the object of a sentence is in Nahuatl. So here, okay, so we're going to cover transitive verbs, okay? So what you're going to learn today is you're going to learn the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs, and you're going to learn the 6 object prefixes. Basically, in Nahuatl, there are some verbs that require you to indicate what the object is, and then there are other verbs where you don't have to indicate what the object is, meaning who are you doing the action to. Last week, we learned about intransitive verbs, okay? So for example, last week we learned the verb niwitoni. If you remember, that means I jump, okay? In those verbs from last week, those intransitive verbs, you have the subject, which is the person who is doing the action, and then you have the verb. So if you think of the verb niwitoni, it means that I jump. When I jump, I don't do that action onto any other object. I don't jump a thing. I don't jump a person. I guess in English that could work, but in Nahuatl, jumping is just jumping. You don't do it to a person or a thing. So in Nahuatl, this verb witoni does not require you to say what object you're doing the action to, because when you're jumping, you're not doing the action to an object. Okay? So intransitive verbs, last week is what we learned. The action is realized with no object. Okay, so here we had last week we learned motlaloa, to run, nehnemi, to walk, witoni, to jump, moqueta, to stand, and mosewia, to sit. Those do not require you to indicate the object because you're just doing those actions. Okay, so these are the verbs that you learned last week, but this week we're gonna learn transitive verbs. So I'm gonna give you examples of what a transitive verb is in English so you can kind of get an understanding of what a transitive verb is. So for example, here are some 5 sentences, such as when you say, I eat a fish. When you say, I eat a fish, you're the agent, I is the subject, eat is the verb, and a fish is the object, meaning when I do this action, I do this action to an object. So this verb eat is a transitive verb. And you'll see later that in Nahuatl, eat is also a transitive verb. When you say you tell a friend, you're doing that action of telling to a friend. So that verb telling is a transitive verb. When you say he makes a toy, he is doing an action of making, and that action is being performed on a toy, etc., etc. Here I give you more examples. We clean the house and they drink water. So in all these examples, I underlined what the object is, meaning the object of where the action is being, who is receiving or what is receiving the action. Whereas if you see on the left, when you say I run, you walk, he jumps, we stand, they sit, there is nothing that you're doing the action to, you're just doing the action. Okay? Okay, so now here I give you an example of a transitive verb in Nahuatl. So I have here ni, which you learned means I, k, to him, and notza, niknotza is how you say in Nahuatl, I call him. It also means I call her, and it also means I call it. So this k here is indicating who you're doing the action to or what you're doing the action to. So this verb notza is a transitive verb that requires you to indicate who or what you're doing the action to. So here that function is performed by the letter C, which is k. It's saying that I am doing the action to him or her or it. Okay, so a transitive verb is a verb where an action is realized to an object. Okay, all right, so here I'm going to give you the 6 prefixes that in Nahuatl indicate an action being done to different types of people. So here we have Nancy, and Nancy, nech notza. Okay, so Nancy is producing, realizing an action on me, on na. You see na, this is the picture of I, right? Nancy is doing this action to I, and the prefix that we're using here is nech. So Nancy nech notza. Nancy calls me. Nancy nech notza. Okay? If Nancy was calling you, you would say Nancy meets notza. So Nancy nech notza, Nancy meets notza. To you. She's doing this action to you. Nancy meets notza. ¿Vale? If she does the action to another person, we would say Nancy ki notza. Nancy ki notza. And here, this ki can mean Nancy calls him. It can mean Nancy calls her, or Nancy calls it, meaning she calls out to that person, like she's doing in this picture, okay? If this action is being done to us, it would be Nancy tech notza. Nancy tech notza. She calls us. If she does it to you all, you would say Nancy mech notza. Nancy mech notza. And if she was calling them, we would say Nancy kin notza. Nancy kin notza. So now I'm going to review them again for you so that hopefully they can stick in your mind. There's 6 that you need to memorize, just like there were 6 pronoun prefixes where we were indicating who was doing the action. Well, now it has 6 prefixes to indicate who is receiving the action. So here are the 6. Nancy nech notza, Nancy meets notza, Nancy ki notza, him or her, Nancy tech notza, to us, Nancy mech notza, and Nancy ki notza. Okay? And notice it's kin with an N. Okay, so here are the 6 again, just in case, all in one slide so that you can refer to it later. When the action is being done to me, it's nech. To you, it's meets. To him or her, it's k. It's si or it's ki, and we'll talk about later about when to use which one. When it's to us, it's tech. When it's to y'all, it's mech. And when it's to them, it's kin. Okay, so those are the 6 that you need to memorize. At the beginning, it's hard, but eventually you'll just get it. The more practice you do. So here are the 6 sentences that we just went over with the translations. Notice that here I put a ya on all of them because it's a third person doing an action. But the ya is not necessary. You can just say nech notza. But here I wrote a ya nech notza, ya meets notza, ya ki notza, ya tech notza, ya mech notza, and ya kin notza. Okay, so this notza means to call out to somebody, like yelling out to them or to call them to come to you, etc. Okay. All right. So as you can tell, obviously notza is one of those transitive verbs. In other words, notza requires you to always indicate who is receiving the action. Okay? It requires it all the time. Meaning if you don't see something here in front of notza, then that verb, I call it naked. The notza is naked. And you don't want naked verbs, okay? You want your verbs to always have something in front to indicate who is receiving the action. So if you see here, I wrote the verb nota, but I left a little space so that when you see verbs like this that have the little space in front of it, you will know that these verbs are the ones that require you always to indicate an object. The subject is not always necessary. Obviously, like in the case of like he or she does something, there is no prefix. So the subject is not always necessary, but indicating the object is always necessary in these transitive verbs. Nahuatl requires you to always do that for transitive verbs.
I have a quick question regarding the subject.
Yes.
Is it okay to generally think of it like in Spanish, where you don't always need to say the pronoun because the conjugation is already implying it?
Yes. Yes. But like, for example, correct. So Nahuatl and Spanish are a little bit different because Nahuatl puts the prefix at the beginning, whereas Spanish has the prefix at the end. I mean, the suffix at the end that indicates the person. But just like in Spanish, where you don't have to say yo como, you can just say como. Nahuatl does the same thing, except that way it would be ni tlacua. So when we say ni tlacua, which is I eat in Nahuatl, the ni is the subject, but that one is always required, the subject, because you're talking about I. And the tla, which you'll learn probably 2 lessons from now, tla indicates that things are being eaten. And then the qua is the verb. But qua means to eat, and qua requires you to say what you're eating. And since if you just want to say I eat in general, well, now what requires you to say I eat things. Even though you're not indicating what things they are, you're putting in that tla in the center, in front of the verb to indicate that you're just eating something. And so now what would require you to say ni tlacua. But to say na ni tlacua, the na is not necessary, but the ni is always necessary.
Yeah, because the ni is like the o on como, right?
The e is like the o in como, correct? Yeah. But where you don't need a subject, it would be like if you say he or she eats something, because in he or she, the prefix is a 0, it's nothing. So then in that case, you would just say tlacua, he or she eats. You would just say tlacua. So the subject is not necessary always because in a third person, it's not there for Nahuatl. But the object of indicating what you're doing the action to is always necessary in transitive verbs.
Cool. Yeah, that's clear. Thank you.
All right. So here it is, niknotza. So this is just re-emphasizing. So we have the subject, the object, and the verb. And to give you another example, if you remember from class 1, episode 1, one of the translations that I gave you at the very beginning was the translation for I love you, which is Nimitztlazotla. And here I'm breaking it down on how Nahuatl says I love you. So the I is the subject, the mitz is to you, which you just learned, and love. So Nahuatl says I to you love. And so in English, this kind of sounds weird to say like I to you love. However, if you speak Spanish, this is equivalent to saying yo te amo. So if you also speak Spanish, this will be very helpful for you. I recognize that not everybody who watches my videos speaks both Spanish and English. But if you do also happen to speak Spanish, it will help you a lot to think about it as yo te amo, because that's exactly how Nahuatl expresses it. Yo te amo. Subject, object, verb. Okay, here are some other examples. Nimitznotza, I call you. I to you call is what Nahuatl says, or yo te llamo. You call me, it would be ti. Ti is the person, you're the one doing the action. And when you call me, I'm the one receiving the action. So you would say ti nech to me, notza, ti nech, notza. You call me, or in Spanish it would be like tú me llamas, ti nech, notza, in Nahuatl. And if you were saying he or she calls you, you would say mitz notza. And see, I want to point this out that in the third person, like I was telling Cody, in the third person, there is no prefix. So here the he or she is implied by not putting something there, but you have to put who you're doing the action to. So you would say meets notza. So meets notza would be he or she calls you. Okay. And so you're probably wondering, how am I to know whether a verb is transitive or intransitive? Because in Nahuatl, basically every verb that you learn, you're gonna have to look up whether or not it's transitive or intransitive. But here I gave you a guideline of how to think about it, because a lot of the time you could take a shortcut and figure it out on your own. So the shortcut that I like to give people is, if the action in English, if the action is being done to another person or another object, it is very likely that in Nahuatl, that verb is going to be transitive, meaning in Nahuatl, it's going to require you to indicate the object. Now, the reason that I say that it's likely and not that it's 100% all the time is because there are some nouns in Nahuatl, some verbs in Nahuatl that require an object, but in Nahuatl, but they don't require an object in English. And so most of the time, if it requires an object in English, in Nahuatl, it does too, but not all the time. And there are some verbs in Nahuatl that don't follow the rules and they have extra prefixes in there that we'll talk about later, like the prefix mo. But for the most part, if in English, you do that action to another person or you do that action to a thing, chances are that in Nahuatl, you will require an object, more than likely. Not always though. So that's your best rule of thumb. However, if you want to be 100% certain, in this class, I'm only going to be using a select few amount of verbs. So in the class notes, in this class, in the description of this video, I'm going to include a link that has a link to the class verbs that indicates with that underscore in front of the verb, whether that verb is transitive or intransitive. Now, I made the chart, and so there may or may not be errors. I double checked it. I don't think there are errors, but if you find errors, you let me know. But essentially on that class list, I basically have like 60, 70 verbs that I'm going to be using multiple times in this class. They're very common verbs and they have the translations on there. And so I put an underscore in front of that verb if that verb requires an object. So those verbs are transitive verbs. The verbs that don't have an underscore in front of them, they do not require that object, an object. So that's how you should know for the most part for this class. Now, of course, I'm not I don't know everything and I can be wrong. So there is also a couple of dictionaries that we're going to be using in the next course, in the next lesson, next week. I'm going to be showing you how to use the dictionary. And so I'm going to be showing you how to use 3 dictionaries, the most useful ones for Huasteca Nahuatl, and I will tell you how to know whether a verb is transitive or intransitive. So next week, you can use those resources to know whether a verb is transitive or intransitive. And so that's, if you want to be 100% certain, go to the dictionary and look it up, okay? And so now I'm gonna click on the link for you all to see the class, this verb, this sheet that I'm talking about. See, you can see these are all the verbs we're going to be using in this class. And you see this underscore, and this tells you that this object, this verb requires an object. I also want to say that I had to shorten some of the definitions for it all to fit. So here it says leave something somewhere, and the SO means, like for example, here it says tell someone something. Okay, so this SO means someone, and this STH means something. So tell someone something. So these are the verbs that you could use. You'll also notice that all the verbs have numbers attached to them. You don't know about why yet, but I'll tell you that every verb also has a class number associated with it that tells you how to create the past tense form of that verb. And so you'll be using this chart as well in the future when we learn about the past tense of the verbs. And so that's what that number indicates, but don't worry too much about it for now. Okay. All right, so make sure that you access that chart later. All right, or especially use it when you're doing the homework, because I made the homework off of that. Okay, So pronouns. Oh yeah. So I want to point out, I've had a lot of students, and a lot of students tend to confuse the pronouns on the left, the ni, the ti, and the in. They tend to confuse them with the nech, the meets, the tech, the mech, and the kin. In other words, the 6 new ones that you learned today, those 6 new ones, a lot of people tend to confuse them with the prefixes. So I want to point out what the main difference between these are. The ones on the left is always telling you who is doing the action. Who is the person doing it? So if I say I eat a fish, I'm the one doing the action and the fish is receiving the action. So if I say I am eating a fish, I would say ni, and then k for it, and then kwa, ni kwa. So the ni is telling that I'm the one doing the action, and the k is saying that the fish is the one receiving the action. So I am eating the fish. Okay, so the prefixes on the right are saying who is being affected, who is receiving the action. Okay, so do not get them confused. I tell you this ahead of time because I've had a lot of students and they get them confused all the time. Make sure you don't, or at least go back to the slide and look at it and don't get them confused. Okay. All right, so now I'm gonna ask you, que nihki moilia. How do you say? Okay, so I want you now, whoever's watching this, to go pull out that, in fact, let me send you all the link right now to the class verbs so that you can reference these class verbs so that you can create these sentences right now. So let me send you all the link. More, show me the chat. Okay, all right, so I sent everybody the link. So click on this link and then you can access these verbs. I think I gave, yeah, this is the link. Access these verbs and then I'm gonna ask you, how do you say something in Nahuatl? So how do you say, que nihki moilia, I help you? So go look at the verbs and look for the verb help.
Is ni meets palewia?
Quali, you got it. Ni meets palewia. Okay, quali. And good job on the pronunciation too. Ni meets palewia. I, to you, help. Ni meets palewia. Yo te ayudo. All right, quali. How would you say, que nihki moilia, I help her? We're gonna do oh, by the way, we're gonna do a lot of these because this is very central to Nahuatl. And so 2 lectures from now, we're also gonna do te and tla, but we're gonna redo these in different ways because I really wanna cement this in your brain because this is like super central to Nahuatl. So you really do need to know this. And so, yeah, we're gonna do more of this. That's what I'm saying. So
would it be Nikwi Palewia?
Okay. All right. So
or is it the ka? Yeah.
So it's nik palewia. And don't worry too much about messing those up right now because right after this, I'm going to explain to you how to use k or ki. But for
yeah, I
now,
figured it was a scenario where I had to make the mistake for you to correct us.
Well, yes. And see, I've taught a lot of students and I know what they mess up. And so I have rules and explanations for reasons of what and what. Okay. So for now, take my word that it's nik palewia, okay? But after this, I'm about to explain what to use because it's a little bit special. Okay, nik palewia. I help her.
I have a question. Why we use the prefix ki, instead of ki?
Okay, so I was explaining to Cody that right after this, I'm going to explain that. So literally like 3 slides or 4 slides from now, I'm going to explain it. Okay?
Okay.
I help him. Que nihki moilia.
Nik palewia.
So it's the same thing. So you think Nik palewia is I help her. Nik palewia is also I help him. Quali. So it didn't change. I help you all.
Ni tech palewia.
It's not tech.
Oh, sorry. Ni mech palewia.
Quali. Ni mech palewia.
Tech is us.
Tech is us. So if you say ni tech palewia, it's I help us. I help them.
Nikin palewia.
Vale, nikin palewia. So it seems that both of you really understand it, which is good. That means that I'm being very clear. So sometimes I fear that I'm not clear. Okay, keniki moilia, you help me.
Tinech palewia.
Vale, tinech palewia. Vale. All right. You help her.
Tik palewia.
Tik palewia, kena. Tik palewia. Vale. Keniki moilia, you help us.
Titek palewia.
It's tech.
Or did I do it again?
It's
Tech. My bad.
not tech. I get it because in English, CH sometimes could be, but in Nahuatl, CH is always ch. Ti tech palewia. Okay.
Also, I was typing the tik palewia while I was saying that from the previous.
Vale. And by the way, you have access to these slides, so you don't have to type these. Because you could always...
typing helps me pay attention and keep focused. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Because you could refer to these all the time, and I make mistakes, but I don't make as many as most people do. And so, but if you find them, definitely let me know, because I'm not perfect either. Oh, sorry. Tikin palewia. I just told you that. Oops. All right. Well, tikin palewia. I gave you a freebie. All right. Keniki moilia, we help you.
Timits palewia.
Vale, timits palewia. Okay, so I want to point out here that, when you're doing plurals, you're going to have that H at the end. Because if you remember from last week, I told you, or I taught you, that when you have more than one person, that you're going to add that H to make it different from you. So if we just say timits palewia, which without the H, it would translate, even though it kind of doesn't work, it would quote unquote translate as you help you, right? But to distinguish you, the T from the U of T, the T of you and the T of we add this H to say timits palewia, and we kind of exhale a little bit to add that extra H. Timits palewia, we help you. So this H is very important. So this H is there for you all, it's there for them, etc. Okay, so you have to remember who you're talking about. Vale. So if you say y'all help her, keniki moilia.
Inka palewia.
All right, so that's one that I'm going to clarify right now. So I'm going to clarify this, don't worry, but it's inki palewia. You got it right mostly. Inki palewia. And you'll ask me why, but you'll know right now. Okay.
I know you'll tell me.
I'll tell you. They help them.
King palewia.
Quali, kin palewia. So here there is no prefix in front of it, right? Because we're talking about they. Okay? They. And the kin is to them. You're doing the action to them. And palewia, help, with an H. I also wanted to point out that a lot of people they get confused between does does this scheme refer to this they, or does this scheme refer to them? And so here is when you need to always be aware that the prefix, this 0 is the one that refers to the they, and the kin refers to who is receiving the action, which is this them. So don't get them mixed up, and you may still get them mixed up, but I hope that you know, if you do it the way that I'm showing you, where you like go step by step, like the way I show you with these arrows and everything, you should get it right all the time. But I'll tell you that people do mess this up a lot. So don't be that person. But if you are that person, go back to these slides and look at them carefully. Okay. Keniki Moilia, you help them.
Tikin palehuya.
Tikin palehuya. Vale. Tikin palehuya. And I think that's it. Okay. Wali. Okay, so here again, I wanted to point out, here's where I'm going to explain to you the difference between using k and using ki. So in Nahuatl, okay, in Nahuatl, the true prefix that you should always consider first is always the k. So if you don't know which one to pick, like majority of the time, it's going to be the k. Majority of the time. However, there are some exceptions, and they're going to make sense hopefully right now. But majority of the time, if you can't figure out which one it is, it's the C, it's the k. However, when you're in front of an I or an E, that's one of the situations where you're going to use ki. Now this kind of makes sense. If you remember from our from lecture number 2 or episode 2, when I was talking to you about pronunciation, I was telling you whenever you have the C before an I or the C before an E, that you're gonna pronounce it as C and se, right? So if you write it as CI or CE, you're gonna be saying it ki, you're gonna be saying C and se, right? But in Nahuatl, that doesn't make any sense because you're trying to preserve that sound of the k. So whenever you see the C in front of an I, you need to change it into a QU so that it becomes QUI, so that now it's ki and ke, right? So in other words, because of this writing system that we're using, we have to change it to a Q, because otherwise saying CI or CE is going to be C and se, and that's not the sound we're going for. We're going for the sound k, and so we want to go say ki and ke, right? So there are some verbs that start with an I or start with an E, and those verbs, you're going to have to switch the C to a QU, okay? That's one situation where you're going to do that. Okay, the other situation where you're going to change that C into a QUI is when it's hard to pronounce. And I will give you examples of this following after this, and it will make more sense. I know this seems abstract. I'm not the kind of person to talk to you all abstractly. I'm going to give you examples of when this happens, and you'll see that it kind of does make really sense when you try to like sound these things out, but it sounds weird when I give you all these crazy rules. But this is the slide you can refer to later if you really want these crazy rules, okay? And then
that makes perfect sense with where I messed up, because it was difficult for me to say
ink palehuya.
Yeah,
yes.
So the key
that's the example
sense.
Right there. Yeah, that's the way you apply that example. If you say ink palehuya, you can't say ink palehuya very comfortable, so that's when you say inki palehuya. Guali, that's a very good example, and I'm about to give you an example like that. And then the last one is when you see C by itself, and you'll understand what this means right now. Don't worry about this C by itself. It's kind of weird and ambiguous, but I'm about to give an example of what I mean by C by itself, okay? And basically what you should do to figure this out is run these rules first, think about this first before you think about putting ki, okay? So don't worry, we're about to apply them, so it's gonna make really good sense right now, okay? Okay, so let me give you one example. So if I want to say I see him, the verb to see is ita, okay? So I want you to think about this step by step. When I say I see him, I am the one doing the action, so I'm going to put the ni, okay? Then I'm going to put the C. Okay, the C, you should always put it there, right? To like try it out. We're always going to try out the C first, always. And then you need to think to yourself, okay, if I put the C there, it's not going to say Nikita any longer if I keep the C there. It's going to say Nisita, right? But we don't want to say Nisita. we want to say nikita, nikita. So in order to preserve the sound, because this verb ends in I, we're going to change it to QU. But really, this verb is really just nikita, nikita. But we're only doing these changes in the writing because we want to preserve the sound. If you remember from previous classes, I was telling you that the newer, the practical the practical alphabet of Nahuatl uses a K instead of a C. Well, in the practical alphabet, they just keep it as a K here and they just say Nikita, and that K doesn't produce any problems. But because we're using the classical system, that's the only reason we're doing this change. But in the practical system, it's just Nikita. They use a K, so the K just stays there and it's just Nikita. So this is practically just a spelling issue, really. But now it just says Nikita. The reason we don't keep the C is just because it would be pronounced Nisita, and we don't want it to be pronounced Nisita. We want to keep the key. So it's Nikita. So I think that rule makes pretty good sense. Same thing if it starts with an E. We would go, if I want to say Nik etokia, I plant beans in someone else's field, which is a weird verb, but I had to find a verb that started with E. Niketokia, because there aren't that many, it turns out, that start with E, but I found one. Niketokia, I plant in his field. Then you got to think, okay, if I put the C there, which we're going to try, then it would say nisetokia, which no, that doesn't sound right, nisetokia. So we want to preserve the sound. We're going to change it to niketokia. Okay, niketokia. It's only to preserve the sound, but really it should just be niketokia. The k is really the one that you're actually going for. So as you can see, you should always try the k first, okay? So here we tried it out. We just changed it to spelling. Okay. The next, okay, this is where that question of if it doesn't sound right comes in. So now let's say we want to say, we call y'all. Nosotros, no, y'all call him. Ustedes le llaman. Ustedes lo llaman. Okay, you should try out the C always, right? So you say in, y'all, k to him, and notza. So you're gonna say, okay, I wanna say ink notza. Okay, but if you want to say ink notza, it's kind of hard to pronounce. It doesn't flow off the tongue very easily. If you just say ink notza, it's kind of hard to say. So when those situations happen, when you're like, it doesn't sound right to me, okay, that's when you're gonna switch it to ki. You're gonna be like, no, it's not ink notza, it's inki notza. So inki notza is so much easier and so much better to pronounce. Okay, ink notza. So that's another example of where you would change it. Okay, I don't know why it keeps doing that, but I'm gonna have to like, okay. Okay, this is another example of where you would use ki instead of k. Okay, if you wanna say he calls him, right? He calls to him, okay? You're always gonna try out the C. When you say he does something, you're not gonna put a prefix because he's the one doing the action. He's doing the action to him, so you're gonna put the k, and then you're gonna put the verb, notza. So this is one of those examples where C is by itself, quote unquote, right? So here you have knotza, right? But knotza is really hard to pronounce. You can't really say knotza, right? And it's also C is by itself, right? So when you have C by itself or it's hard to pronounce, like it is here, knotza is hard to say. That's another situation where you're gonna say kinotza, okay? So those are the three exceptions that I gave you. So I know they seemed very abstract, but here giving you a very concrete example, it's really obvious why you should change that C and make it a ki. Okay. Okay.
One question regarding the practical system. I know that's not what we're studying, but
you will learn it eventually.
Oh, okay. So in that scenario, it would still be kinotza, it would just be with the K instead of the QU, right?
Exactly. But see, in kinotza, you would still have this problem, right? Because you would have knotza, right? And then you're like, well, knotza doesn't sound right. So you're like, okay, then it's ki. And then this issue over here with the ink notza, you still have that same problem. It would still be ink notza. And then this issue with the vowels, you wouldn't have that problem because niketokia, the K just makes a k sound always, right? So niketokia, this problem doesn't exist either. You wouldn't even have to change this. So with the K, the problem is solved actually a lot better than with the C. It's only because we're using the Spanish writing system. And this is one of the reasons why people are like, well, using the Spanish writing system kind of sucks because we have to do these weird writing changes. And with the practical alphabet, you don't have to do these changes. So this is one of the arguments against using the Spanish writing system. The only reason we use it is because there's so much literature in classical Nahuatl. There's like tons, even modern writing that's in classical Nahuatl, that it is beneficial for you to learn it. But eventually you will learn both systems. And basically you should be able to convert between them. I personally think that the practical alphabet is going to win because right now there's a movement to change it, and I've been watching videos from native speakers, and the majority of them are agreeing to use the practical system. So maybe this may become obsolete in the future, but for now we're going to learn both. But just know eventually in this class, eventually we're going to be doing the practical system too. And honestly, it's not that different. It's just some changes in some letters. And that's why.
Yeah, it's kind of like in English when you have British honor or English honor with the O and OU, right? It's just spelling preference.
Ultimately, right? the pronunciation is exactly the same. It's just how you're writing it is different, but the pronunciation is the same. Okay, so these are other examples where C is by itself, right? So if you want to say, I see him. So if you say, I see him, he is doing the action to him. So we put the C there, and then we put the verb ita, and then you have ita, right? You have ita, and then C is by itself. But if you also think about it, if you have C followed by a vowel, then it would be sita, right? But we don't want to say sita, we want to keep the sound kita. So then that's when you change it to kiita. Oh, I also want to point out that when you change this to kiita, we do keep both of the I's. In our variety of Nahuatl, the one from Huasteca, we keep both I's. But in some varieties, they like to join them together. So you might see some varieties just write a kita with just one I. But in our variety, we write it with two I's. I'll accept either one. But I'm just letting you know, you'll see it as kiita. And we actually do pronounce it like that, kiita. We kind of elongate it to make it obvious that we're saying he sees him, kiita, okay? But some varieties actually do say just kita. So be aware. Okay, here's another example with the E. When it's C by itself or it's followed by a vowel, it becomes ki etokia, ki etokia. Okay, all right. So now I give you a whole bunch of examples. And so now I'm gonna pull out your verbs and I'm gonna ask you, Keniki moilia, we help him. Well, actually this verb you already know. So you don't have to pull out your chart, but I believe in the future 2 or 3 exercises, there are going to be new verbs. So it does help to have the chart out, okay? So, so for now, you know this verb, but there's going to be verbs that you won't know. So, Keniki moilia, we help him. So now that you know this rule about the k and the ki, let's practice this. So think about we help him, okay?
Tlachihualiztli.
Ashkana. Tlachihualiztli means he helps us. So here's an example where you mix them up, right? You said Tech is he helps us. So remember, you go step by step. Go start with the we, and then start with the him, and then start with the verb.
Tiki palewia.
Okay, so here you said tiki palewia, right? So it's not tiki palewia, it's tiki palewia. Okay. But this is why we do this exercise. So remember, the first thing you should always try is the k, the C, okay? And then if there's a problem with the C, then you'll switch it to the ki. Okay, so what are the 3 potential problems? The 3 potential problems is if this one started with a vowel, but if it started with an E or an I, but this doesn't start with an E or an I, this starts with a P. So tik palewia is fine, right? Or the other problem would be if it sounds weird, like meaning it sounds like ink palewia, like it's hard to pronounce. But tik palewia is not hard to pronounce. And the last possible problem would be if C was by itself. So notice C is not by itself here because there's a T here, so it's tik palewia. If this T was not here and it was just k palewia, then it would be kpalewia, and then we'd be like, wait a minute, kpalewia is hard to pronounce. I'm gonna change it to kipalewia. See? So always try out the k first. And if there's a problem with it, like those 3 problems that I just told you, then you switch it to the ki, okay? Is that clear or no? So here there's no problem with the k sound. The tikpalewia sounds perfectly fine, so we keep it. But you'll see examples where it doesn't sound fine in you know, the coming examples, and then you'll be like, oh, that's the problem. So we, to him, help. Tikpalewia. Okay. So let's do this step by step. Let's do this one together. Okay. We help her. Okay. So let's start with who is doing the action. So it's we. So if it's we, we're going to start with ti. Who is receiving the action? She is receiving the action. So we're going to put k. And then the verb is palewia with an H because we're talking about we. So this one would be tikpalewia. And then we got to think, wait, is there a problem with the C or not? So we can decide between k or ki. So tikpalewia, okay, palewia is not a verb that ends in E or I, starts with E or I, so I can still keep the C. Tikpalewia is not hard to pronounce. And what was the last one? C is not by itself here. So C is tik. So C is not by itself, right? So it's not palewia. So then that's why we keep it as tikpalewia. Okay? Was that clear? We're gonna come up with ones that quote unquote have a problem, and then you will hopefully get it right. But if not, I'll give you that explanation again. Okay? Keniki moilia, y'all help him. So let's think about it step by step. Let's go, y'all.
Inkipalewia.
Quali. So you got inkipalewia. Okay, so let's do it step by step. So in would be the person. The k would be the one receiving the action, he or she. So it would be ink palewia, right? But we said earlier that ink palewia is hard to pronounce. So we're not going to say ink palewia. We're going to say inki palewia. Does that make sense to you, Julia or Julia? Julia or
Yes,
Julia?
thank you.
Okay, so do that exercise. This is why I do these exercises, so you could see the process, the thinking that I'm doing. Eventually, you're just gonna be like, thinking palewea. You're not even gonna think about it. It's gonna become normal. But you know, at the very beginning, you're like, well, why am I using k and ki and which one? Well, apply those rules, okay? So try applying these rules on the next one. He helps her.
Kipalewia.
Wally. So it is kipalewia, okay? So when we say he is doing an action, we're not going to put a prefix in front because he is doing an action, a third person, no prefix, okay? So we put 0 in front. And then he is doing an action to her. So we're going to put the C there to like try it out. So now we have k. And then palewia is the verb. So we're like, okay, it's k palewia. But k palewia is hard to pronounce and C is by itself, k palewia. So that's when we're like, oh, we can't have C by itself and we can't pronounce k palewia very well. So it's ki palewia. Does that make sense? Just try it out multiple times. Eventually you'll get it. But Cody clearly got it. But you know, just know that's the process that you're thinking through to figure this out. He to her helps. Kipalewia. So nothing in front. Ki, because we can't say kipalewia. There you go. She helps him.
Kipalewia.
Same thing. Kipalewia. All right. So she's doing the action. Because she's doing the action, we don't put anything here in front. He is receiving the action. So we put the k there as a placeholder to try it out. And then the verb is palewia. But then we're like, well, palewia sounds weird. So I'm going to change it to ki palewia. Easy to pronounce. Okay. So now pull out your verbs and look up how to say, I believe her. I believe her.
Nick nel toca.
Wally, you got it. So there you go. Nick nel toca. Okay, so here we have the situation where it's ni, I'm doing the action. She's receiving the action, and believing is the verb, nick nel toca. Okay, so nel toca is a verb that starts with an N, so there's no problem there. There's not an E or an I. Nick nel toca is easy to pronounce. And what was the last thing? Oh, C is not by itself. C is not, I always forget the rules because I just do it.
Yeah.
So C is not by itself here. It's nick, right? So nick nel toca, quali. Okay. You believe her.
Tik ne tolka.
Quali. Tik nel toca. So this is the same thing. Tik nel toca is easy to pronounce. Nel toca does not start with a vowel, E or I, and C is not by itself. So tik nel toca. Quali? She believes her.
Ki nel toka.
Ki nel toca. Quali? Okay, so she is doing the action, nothing to put in front, right? She is the other girl is receiving the action, so we're gonna put the k there to try it out. And then nel toca is to believe. And then we're thinking, wait, k nel toca doesn't sound right to me, so I'm gonna switch it to ki nel toca. Right? We help her. We help her. And by the way, I gave a lot of examples so you could look at this later because I know that this is somewhat confusing sometimes. And eventually you'll get it though.
Tik nel toka.
Tik nel toca with an H. Okay, so we go T for us, for we. We're doing the action to her. So that's why we put the k there to try it out. Nel toca, to believe, and the H at the end for we, to make it plural. Tik nel toca. Okay, so we believe her. And then tik nel toca is easy to pronounce. And tik nel toca, the C is not by itself, so we keep it as tik nel toca. We don't change it. Okay, y'all believe her.
Ki nel toka.
Wally, this one is in ki nel toca. Okay, so y'all are doing the action. Y'all are doing the action to her. And nel toca is the verb. Okay, so we try out the k. We say ink nel toca, and we're like, wait, ink nel toca sounds weird. So we're gonna change it to inki nel toca. Ink nel toca is not easy to pronounce. Inki nel toca is though. So it's inki nel toca. They believe her.
Ki nel toca.
Wally, yes, you got it. Sounds like you got the rules. Okay, so so there's an error there. I meant to put they here. Hopefully I keep making the error on the next slides, but here it's supposed to be they. They are doing the action to her. And el toca, so because they are doing the action, we don't put anything in front. We are gonna try out k here, so we're gonna say k nel toca. And so we try out the k nel toca, and we're like, well, that sounds weird. So we change it to ki nel toca. All right. So this is the summary of what you need to learn. Obviously, you should know these by now. We've done it like a bajillion times, which is good. Repetition is gonna help you remember these. But these are the new ones that you have to learn now. I know that there's more to learn, and I recognize there's a lot to learn because last week you also learned a whole bunch of stuff. This is so important that we're gonna do it again in 2 lectures from now. Not exactly the same way because I obviously don't want to bore you, but we're gonna use these multiple times because these are very important. You're gonna see that in the homework. I gave you more of a homework that has like a kind of like a review of things we've learned in the past, and I give you some mini exercises with these prefixes, and but in the lecture after that, in 2 lectures from now, I'm gonna do this again, but I'm gonna give you way more examples. So definitely do the homework if you're still confused, so you could check your answers. Next week, we're not going to get all crazy grammar heavy. Next week, I'm going to show you how to use the dictionaries. Now you have the necessary knowledge on how to use the dictionary, because now you know the difference between transitive and intransitive. So next week, I'm going to show you which dictionaries to use, how to use them, and how to interpret the dictionary, because in Nahuatl, there are still some things that you need to know that are very specific to Nahuatl, that are not just about transitive and intransitive. Okay? So we're going to talk about that next week. Tlazokamati miak. I want to thank everybody who has supported me, who has donated. So far, there have been a lot of donations. Thank you so much. I have patrons on Patreon, so I want to thank all my patrons from Patreon. Tlazokamati miak. And I'm going to leave it up to Tlachihualiztli. I know that this class is very grammar heavy, and I hope that it was clear, and definitely ask me questions if you didn't understand. But I think you did. I think I made it clear for once. All right. Any questions from the homework? I don't see questions on the chat, so I'm just gonna leave it up.
No, I asked mine during the lesson, and it was very helpful. Thank you.
Vale. Julia, do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you. Tlazokamati.
Ashlyn. All right, well, that means that I did my job, since it was clearly clear. That's good. It's good to know, because trust me, this lesson can be complicated. I've done it in the past and had many people mess up. So that's why I think I got better at teaching it. All right. So Kwali and Tlazokamati miak and Timoitase as Chicuelillo. We'll see each other next week. And I'll probably be in a new location. We'll see.
I hope so.
Hope so. If not,
Tlazokamati, Diego.
Ashtlen.